Deltarune allows players to piece together its story, with one of its most foreshadowing theories being the chess theory. The chess theory states that each chapter's boss represents one of the 6 pieces in chess, and the chapters are going in descending order from the most valuable piece to the least. This also means that Chapter 7 of Deltarune will likely feature chess's 7th piece that remains hidden to the others, which, if the chess theory holds any merit, I found to be extremely clever and would make for a climactic finish to the series, marking the end of the onslaught of Deltarune theories. In chess, the 6 pieces each have their own value, based on how useful they are in different situations, with the king having an infinite value, as with their loss the game is over. The queen has a value of 9 pawns, the rook has a value of 5, the bishop is considered to have a value just above the knight at 3.5, the knight has a value of 3, and the pawn has a value of 1. The chessboard itself also represents the battle between the lightners, the white pieces, and the darkners, the black pieces. So who exactly is each piece, and what does this tell us about Deltarune's remaining chapters and their bosses like the elusive knight? Chapter 1 started with the most valuable chess piece being king as the main antagonist, who, just like when a king in chess normally doesn't come into play until threatened, we never see king until we get through everyone else in the game and are finally able to confront him. Since all of Deltarune didn't end upon king's defeat, like it would if it were a chess match, and he merely sits in Castletown's prison, King may not yet be out of the game entirely. Chapter 2 then introduced us to the next chess piece in line, being Queen. Queen is worth the equivalent of 9 pawns, and is considered to be the strongest piece on the board. And just like a chess queen, Queen is incredibly mobile, as she appears literally everywhere throughout the chapter, and seems to pop up at any random moment, like she does at the game's opening immediately after meeting Noelle, who Queen seems intent on making into her pawn, because she wishes to promote Noelle into being her knight so she can open more dark fountains, like the knight expanding the cyber world. Interestingly, the only movement pattern that a queen is unable to perform in chess is the movement of a knight, as every other piece she can essentially copy herself, which could mirror the fact that Queen needs her knight to open up dark fountains, as she is unable to do what the knight has been doing herself. And like every piece in chess, but for one special piece, Queen also needs a pawn in front of her to move before she can, just like the villain for Chapter 3. If chess theory stays true, then that means that the next villain for Chapter 3 will be the Rook. So far, players have speculated that the Rook will be a character mentioned in Chapter 2 named Mike, with Chapter 3 being set to be a TV-themed world. Not much is known about Mike, and if Mike is the Rook, then that would mean that, like the Queen, he needs a pawn to move first before he can. Chess theory points to this pawn most likely being Spamton, who Mike controlled like a puppet. It seems likely that Spamton worked with and possibly relied on Mike for some time when he was a big shot, and it looks like Spamton places blame on Mike for his fall from the top, mentioning Mike several times and referring to him as a criminal. It's from Spamton's dialogue choices throughout Chapter 2, where he constantly talks about being on TV, saying, "Are you a game show host?" and the grin that comes across the TV at Chapter 2's end, making it seem that Mike probably has something to do with TV and could be the host of his show that we have to go up against in Chapter 3. Furthermore, thanks to chess theory, we can theorize that Chapter 4 onward is going to be incredibly interesting. Players have discovered many locations hinting at the possibility of a dark fountain eventually appearing there. These locations for future chapters seem to be the lake, the bunker, Asgore's flower shop, and the church, although they could end up appearing elsewhere in places like the police station. Previously, we had no idea what order they would appear in, but going off the chess theory's order for each of the villains, we can figure out where the next chapters, like Chapter 4, may take place. Chess theory holds that Chapter 4's villain will be a bishop, implying that the next dark world will have a religious theme to it, in which case Chapter 4's dark fountain may likely take place in the church, and possibly the graveyard. This also points to Father Alvin likely being involved, although I don't see him being the main villain, as the pattern for all of the other main villains in this chess theory's battle of lightners versus darkners seems to be that the main bosses are always darkners. More evidence pointing to Chapter 4 taking place at the church is we know that the church tends to hold its service on Sunday, as the game points out how Chris and their family would go to QC's diner on Sunday after the church's service. We know that Chapter 2 most likely ends on a Friday, with Chapter 3's world most likely taking all of Saturday, based off of a couple things we see in the game. At Chapter 2's end, after Chris and Susie spent a day at school and then went to the cyber world, we see Toriel, a teacher at the school, ask Susie if she would like to have a sleepover with Chris. Normally a parent, let alone a teacher like Toriel, probably wouldn't allow this sleepover with Chris and Susie staying up late watching television to happen unless it was the weekend, and specifically Friday. Strangely enough, we do hear Rudy say in Chapter 2's end that he may go to church tomorrow if he's feeling well enough, which would put Chapter 2 happening on Saturday, which doesn't quite line up with everyone having gone to school that day and the church holding its service on Sunday. So it's likely that Rudy just means that he would merely be visiting the church on his own accord. So with Chris and Susie having gone to school in Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 occurring on Saturday within Toriel's house, it seems likely that Chapter 4 with its bishop boss will take place on Sunday at the church. We could also see Noelle having another large involvement in this chapter, given the religious implications of her and her family's names, but we also know that Rudolph's condition is worsening and that he could possibly die in Chapter 3, with Chapter 4 beginning with his funeral. This brings us to Chapter 5 happening on Monday and revealing Deltarune's 5th and long-awaited boss with a whopping value of 3 pawns, being the Knight. This is also coincidentally during the start of the same week that Azrael is supposed to return from college. Not saying he's the Knight, but Chapter 5 may begin with seeing the return of our original Fluffy Boy as the gang gears up to challenge Deltarune's Knight. The Knight is also rather consistent with chess theory, as other than the pawns, they are the only piece that can freely move around from the start of the game completely unobstructed by anything else. And we know that Deltarune's Knight has been anything but stuck in place, as they've ran around steering the game from the shadows from the very start. And with the addition of Chapters 3, 4, and 5 being released all at once, it makes sense that we could end up facing off against the Knight in Chapter 5. While we don't yet know where Chapter 5 will take place, it's possible that a later chapter like Chapter 6 will take place in Asgore's flower shop. On the second floor of Asgore's flower shop, you will see 7 different colored flowers, each sitting in its own case. While this has been seen as a reference to the 7 human souls that Asgore set out to collect in Undertale, with the red soul that he never collected from Frisk being replaced with a golden flower, these flowers are also seen in the photo on his fridge, making up Toriel's wedding bouquet. Asgore's hopelessly trying to preserve them, just as he is hopelessly trying to regain the family he once had. But chess theory has speculated that these 7 flowers could also represent the 7 pawns that we control throughout Deltarune, with each flower representing a different character from Chris and Susie's class, who will end up joining them across each chapter. Some players have thought that this theory about the pawns could also be foreshadowed by the rooms we see in Queen's Mansion, as classmates like Jonkington have their own room. Except the room which says it's Caddy's isn't for Caddy, who sits behind Noelle in class and spells her name with an I, but is rather her older sister's room, who spells her name with a Y. Nevertheless, the 6th piece in chess theory that we will face off against in Chapter 6 is shown to be a pawn. As to who this pawn might be, it's very hard to say this far away, and the main antagonist to Chapter 6 could very well end up showing the re-emergence of what was originally supposed to be the player's pawn in the game, being the discarded vessel. And it's with this reveal that the final chess piece that Chapter 7 may hold for players will pleasantly shock them. Which I've gotta say, if this ends up being what chess theory is pointing to, would make for a really climactic finish to the game, with theories like chess theory and T-theory tending to show us some really surprising details. In chess, the supposed 7th chess piece is not a movable piece, but is the player themselves, the one controlling all the pieces from the shadows. Chapter 7 will see us, the player, finally facing off against the unnamed player on the opposite side of the board. Who this person is, we don't really know, except for one possibility that's been hinted throughout Deltarune's chapters. And I don't think that we will be fighting against this individual as Chris, but rather we will end up fighting this person with the only individual that we'll have left to personally control, being our discarded vessel. Yes, the other player that we will fight against in Deltarune's finale is none other than Chris. With the Knight removed as the main villain in Chapter 5, Chapter 6 could end with Chris splitting from us and our soul having to inhabit the vessel as a dark fountain envelops the entire town. Seeing how we don't really know if the vessel will end up coming back in Deltarune's story, I saved an extremely interesting detail for last. When looking at each dark fountain, we can see that the pattern on the fountains is the same exact pattern as that of the Goner Maker, where we made the discarded vessel in the first place, showing that the vessel may yet be connected to Deltarune's events. If you want more crazy Deltarune theories, then check out this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.